This is Torsten from Boner Magazine.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very well, how are you?
Fine, thanks.
Great, good morning, and thank you for agreeing to talk to Boner Magazine. These Systems Are Failing is your 13th studio album. Some critics describe it as your most furious album in 20 years. Some even call it a fiery eulogy for the future. It is, however, like your previous works, totally different from what you've done before. So are you not getting tired of changing musical styles all the time?
I know we live in a world where most musicians sort of pick a genre or pick a style and they stick with it. In a way, I almost envy musicians like that because it certainly makes their professional lives easier. You know, when you think of a band like Metallica, who have been a heavy metal band for 40 years. Mm-hmm. And so as a result, their fans always know what to expect. But my love for music has very little to do with genre, and it has everything to do with how music affects me emotionally. So I guess my loyalty is not to any one style or any genre, it's to just how I respond emotionally to music. And so when I'm making records in different styles of music, I'm not trying to be strange, and I'm not trying to be weird, I'm not trying to make a point. I just get really excited by different styles of music.
When I'm listening to These Systems Are Failing, I find the songs are vibrant with rage, contempt, and convey very little tenderness, unlike other songs you've written. Where does this new sound come from?
Well, in the last couple of years, I found myself listening to a lot of the punk and post-punk that I grew up with. You know, bands like Killing Joke and The Damned and Magazine, the Buzzcocks. And I just really love energetic, passionate, loud music. I mean, I also love quiet, tender music. I mean, just this morning, I was listening to Cat Stevens' greatest hits and listening to Debussy and Bach. So I think that for me, at least, there's room for all of these different types of music to very peacefully coexist. You know, sometimes it's nice to listen to Gershwin, and sometimes it's nice to listen to Black Sabbath.
Now for the next question, I need to share something personal with you, if that's okay.
Sure.
During the early to mid-90s, I was a pill and acid poppin' gay teenage mess with very, very little faith in the world as it was. And I remember coming home after a rave one morning, turning on MTV and seeing the video for Go, which is your famous breakthrough track. The song and the visuals made sense to me and really made me calm down in a lot of ways, which I guess is odd given it's a dance track. I have since followed your musical evolution, which actually helped me feeling less weird about the way I see the world. You know, because this underground music crush that I had managed to become mainstream, and so I figured I can't be completely mad. Now, my question is, when you write songs, are you ever aware of the reaction you might get from them?
I used to think about the reaction, let's say 15 years ago, when I had a much bigger audience. But now it's 2016, and people don't really buy albums, and they don't really listen to albums, and I don't go on tour. So when I'm making music, I'm hoping that someone might listen to it, but I'm not expecting it. So honestly, most of the satisfaction that I get from making music at this point is simply the act of making music. And if I make a record and it goes out into the world and someone listens to it, that's really nice, but I don't expect it.
Let's take a little detour away from your music. From very early on, you have been an advocate for veganism, your passion for the subject coming from a place of love for animals. How do you explain that veganism now has become a megatrend?
Well, there's a quote that I love from Martin Luther King Jr., and he said that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I think that it also bends towards reason, and it bends towards intelligence as well. And hopefully this doesn't sound self-serving, but there are so many reasons, really, really rational reasons for people to consider relying less on animal agriculture, that it makes me think that within 50 years, animal agriculture will just be a very marginal part of human culture. Because in addition to destroying animals, animal agriculture also contributes 50% of climate change, 75% of antibiotic resistance, 50% most cancers, diabetes, heart disease, obesity, famine, rainforest deforestation. So I really see the vegan movement as being very rational. It's just a more evidence-based, rational way of dealing with the world in which we live.
And a much more respectful one, I'd say, too.
Yeah, I mean, it's better for animals, it's better for people, it's better for the environment, better for resources. It just makes so much more sense to me. And I think that humans get very addicted to old ways of doing things. But as we've seen, when given a chance, human beings tend to make the right decision. If we look at 100 years ago in the United States, women couldn't vote. Same-sex couples couldn't be together or they were thrown in prison. Children worked in factories, and black people and white people couldn't go to the same schools or share the same drinking fountains. So clearly, progress is possible. And I think that one amazing thing about the internet is it speeds up progress. I mean, you look at like marriage equality, in the United States at least, marriage equality 10 years ago was a very fringe issue. And now marriage equality is the law of the land. It happened so wonderfully, so quickly, really facilitated, I think, by social media. And I see the same thing happening with animal agriculture and veganism.
Well, thank you for saying that. It brings me back to the first question, to some of the statements critics have made about these systems are failing. Would you agree that it is a eulogy for the future? Is your outlook really that gloomy?
I think that my outlook is sort of paradoxical, meaning I'm incredibly optimistic, but I'm also incredibly pessimistic. My hope, because I think that human beings will ultimately make the right decisions. And I think that human beings have so much potential to evolve and do great things. I just hope that we haven't screwed things up so much that we won't be allowed the opportunity to make things better. I mean, I think of it like someone who smokes cigarettes, where someone might be smoking cigarettes and then decide to stop, but what if they already have cancer? And I look at our species like that, like we're about to make very smart choices, but what if we've already doomed ourselves? And so I don't know if it's a eulogy for the future, but it's certainly, I would say, very rational, justified concern for our ability to actually fix things. Like climate is a system that is so huge that even if we want to fix it, there's a chance we might not be able to.
These are very haunting thoughts. I mean, you have been a public figure for over 2 decades now, worked with some of the greatest artists in the world, continue to produce great songs, and have all this intellectual approach to what's going on the planet. What are the things that keep you going?
What keeps me going is my complete fascination with the human condition and my love for the very act of being alive and trying to, not just for me, I mean for everything, for plants, for animals, for spiders, for everything. Like life to me is such a bizarre, magical phenomenon. And that, trying to understand that and trying to sort of understand the mentality of a universe that has created life, to me, that's the most exciting, interesting part of being alive. And it also makes me not take many aspects of human culture very seriously. So I would honestly rather spend time with my microscope than go to a celebrity party.
I'm sure there's a lot more to discover.
I mean, I got to say, like, I've learned more looking at plant samples in my microscope than I have from hanging out with just about any celebrity I've ever met.
And also from transcendental meditation, if I'm right. You're a very strong advocate for that movement.
Sorry to interrupt, but
no, sure.
I like transcendental meditation, but I almost see it as being like, it's a musical genre, and transcendental meditation is great, but so are other types of meditation.
I see. Okay.
Zen meditation, Native American meditation, anything. To me, there are 2 goals of meditation. One is to just calm people down and enable them to be healthy. And the other is to change the way in which people respond to their feelings and their thoughts so that people are less plagued by negative thoughts and negative feelings, which, we could have a very long conversation about how neural architecture, how the brain architecture responds to meditation, but unfortunately, I don't know if we have enough time. But simply, I just think
we don't. We're actually running out of time shortly.
Yeah. So, but I'm a fan of any type of meditation because simply the data indicates that it's really good for people. So that's why I think it's a good idea. And also, if it makes people happier and calmer and less angry and less depressed and less bitter, that's a good thing.
So one last thing back to your music. You've just released a wonderful video produced and directed by Steve Cutts for Are You Lost in the World Like Me? Are you already thinking about your next release?
Yeah, I mean, that's, for me, one of the things I love about making records or releasing records is it then becomes an opportunity to have conversations like the conversation you and I are having. Mm-hmm. And it also enables me to release weird videos that might somehow either be interesting or artistic or address issues that I care about. Because what I found is, for example, if I was to write a little essay about human isolation, I don't know that many people would read it. But if you make an adorable cartoon about human isolation, tens of millions of people are ready to watch it.
That's true. You reach wider.
Yeah.
Let's talk a bit about politics, if you like. What's going on in the US right now? I mean, what the heck? How do you think the outcome of the US presidential elections may affect issues like gay rights or environmental protection?
Well, it looks right now as if Hillary Clinton is going to win, which I love Hillary, and I've known her for a long time, and I think she's very smart, and I think she's not a perfect person, but she's so much better than Donald Trump. And I'm just looking forward to November 9th when we don't have to look at Donald Trump anymore. But one really interesting thing is Donald Trump is a racist and a misogynist, and he's a terrible human being, but he hasn't said a single negative thing about the LGBTQ community. And I find that actually quite hopeful that, like, here you have this right-wing politician, but what's happened, because I remember growing up, and I'm sure you remember this as well, that like being gay in the 70s or the 80s or even in the 90s carried such a stigma.
Yes.
And in the United States, that stigma is really disappearing. I mean, of course, it still exists in many right-wing parts of the United States, but the fact that we've gotten to the point where our right-wing Republican candidate for president is not talking about reversing marriage equality. So that's progress. I mean, of course, there's so much more progress to be made, but it really is, compared to how bad things were for the LGBTQ community, things have gotten a lot better. And it's, similar to race relations and many other things, like when things get better, it doesn't mean that people can be complacent, and it doesn't mean people should say that they can't be made even better, but I think it's important to acknowledge just how much better things are than they used to be.
Absolutely. And have some gratitude for that too.
Yeah, and it's saying, like, it's similar to veganism, like animal rights activism is my life's work, and there's so much work to be done, but sometimes it's important to recognize the progress that's been made as opposed to just focus on the horrible things that are going on and how much work needs to be done. It's also just, it's lovely, like something happened, I don't know when, but now it is just an accepted fact that most American politicians will march in gay pride parades. Where 20 or 30 years ago, unless you were the mayor of New York, no politician would ever march in a gay pride parade, and now most of them do. And what I love about that is, because the thing, I mean, I'm saying this as someone who grew up in the gay community, so, I'm not explicitly gay. The thing that has always broken my heart, and of course you know this more than I do, is the idea that someone would feel shame around who they were. That is so heartbreaking and unnecessary. And so every time there are advances in gay rights, it just means that some 14-year-old boy or 14-year-old girl has a chance to be less ashamed. And that is a truly beautiful thing, I think.
I couldn't agree more.
I mean, I don't even know what that must have been like. All the people who grew up for thousands of years pretending to be something they weren't and being ashamed of who they were. Like that is like, that just feels like a crime against humanity to me.
Well, it changes your way of life.
Yeah.
It's that simple. It
I
turns you into a different person than you could have been.
Yeah, I have an older family member, and he was only able to come out of the closet in his 60s. So the fact that he spent 60 years living a lie is it makes me sad to the core of my being that someone just wouldn't be free to love who they want to love and to be who they want to be. So when I see the progress made around that, it just makes me really happy.
Well, thanks for the support. This sounds very great coming from you. Thank you.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I have to get going, but it was really, really a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Thanks for talking to us.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Well, thanks again. Have a wonderful day.
And you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.